Welcome to our webinar. We have a very large group joining us today, so we're going to wait just one more minute for everyone to get logged on. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to What's New in CMMC Preparedness. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We will answer as many as we can during our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your questions today, a KTL representative will reach out to provide answers. Our webinar is being recorded, and you will be sent a link to the recording after the webinar, as well as a PDF copy of the deck. We've got a packed agenda today. We're going to cover town hall news, CMMC practices and processes, Microsoft offerings, GCC versus GCC High, shared responsibility, the Microsoft CMMC acceleration program, and then we'll touch on KTL consulting and implementation. We have two live speakers today. KTL Solutions is excited to welcome Richard Wakeman, Senior Director of Aerospace and Defense for Azure Global Engineering. Richard is the commercial industry lead for Azure Government, Microsoft's cloud solutions specifically engineered to meet U.S. government compliance and security requirements. Richard specializes in the defense industrial base, adopting cloud services from Microsoft, and he is the program manager for the Microsoft Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, acceleration program. We also have with us today live David Bedard from KTL Solutions. David is Senior Account Manager for Aerospace and Defense. KTL is a Microsoft Gold partner offering licensing and consulting services. David has over 15 years experience working in cybersecurity and is a CMMC registered practitioner. He works with new and existing clients, guiding them through CMMC and NIST requirements. Okay, let's get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for the introductions, and thank you everybody for attending. As Elizabeth mentioned, we have a jam-packed agenda today. So I'm going to start off with some highlights about KTL Solutions. KTL, we started over 20 years ago, and today we're recognized as a Microsoft Gold partner in application development, application integration, cloud platform, cloud productivity, data analytics, enterprise resource planning, and small and mid-market cloud solutions. But we haven't just stopped there. We continue to press forward to bring our clients the best-in-class offerings with Microsoft and continue to grow to assist our defense industry-based clients. Late last year, KTL was also provided an opportunity to become a CMMC registered provider organization, and has strived to bring this expertise across all levels, having account managers serving as pre-sale registered practitioners to consult, to our consulting staff on hand, also designated as registered practitioners and holding additional security-related certifications. KTL is positioning ourselves to provide a leadership role across all CMMC domains with our suite of CMMC products and service offerings. So to kind of jump right into things, some of the highlights from the last two town hall meetings are as follows. The PMs, they've been instructed from the DoD to follow the mandate, the DoD 5000.90, which was released late last year. It provides the guidance to the PMs on, what needs to be inside these RFI, RFPs, how they're supposed to be laid out, how they're supposed to designate what levels of CMMC, if they're applicable, within these RFPs and RFIs. And for right now, based off of Lieutenant Colonel Brian Lamb from the February town hall, they're only supposed to be verifying that the score is in the spurs in order to award a contract. And right now, since we're already at the end of March, the DCMA, they've already in process of assessing the C3PAOs that are in the initial program. So we're still waiting for some news and information, and some of the March highlights were mostly cosmetic in nature, with some branding around certification roles under CMMC, such as now it's no longer CP for Certified Professional, it's a CCP for Certified CMMC Professional, CCA for Certified CMMC Assessor. They've also announced that the CMMCAB has their first official CEO, Matt Travis, who is the former CISA Deputy Director. And they've also announced that they've made some changes to the site. They've added in some general facts with some more frequently asked questions that are asked on a regular basis. So if you have some of those burning questions, they've probably likely been asked before, visit the CMMCAB's website to take a look at their facts section to get most of the answers that you have to get answered. We're all aware of the practices and processes, everything from level 1 to level 5. Most of us are focused in on that level 3 requirement, the 130 controls under CMMC, 110 under NIST 171. Based off the February town hall, levels 1 through 3 are pretty locked in, where they're going to make some changes and some revisions are possibly around the level 4 and level 5 areas. Now, so the timelines themselves haven't really changed as far as the plan on when CMMC will be required on all the DoD contracts. They're still shooting for 2026, but some of the rollout is still kind of a moving target. Some of these pilot programs have kind of bled into 2022 fiscal year, but the one thing that's for sure that's really clear is the early adopters are going to have that competitive advantage. Beyond just having their SPUR scores and knowing what their NIST assessment scores are, they're going to know what their plan of actions are in order to close out these POAMs, to kind of jump ahead and make sure that they get closer and closer to being ready for eventually being audited for CMMC. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard Wakeman to kind of talk about the Microsoft offerings and some of the shared responsibilities. With that, Richard?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. And just looking here, looks like it's transferred over to my desktop. So in terms of looking at the topic of discussion, one of the very first topics I saw at table stakes discussions I have with most customers is looking at the cybersecurity maturity model certification, understanding which Microsoft cloud service offering aligns with CMMC level 1 versus CMMC level 3, and of course historically with DFAR 7012, and of course controlled unclassified information that include ITAR export controls. And the chart that I have up here does illustrate that we do have multiple different cloud service offerings. In fact, there's quite a bit of confusion I've heard here over the last several years whenever they say, do we need to have a government cloud? And then, of course, there's the question of, if you do have a requirement for the government cloud, which one? Because as you can see that we've got multiple different enclaves depending on which level of compliance requirements that you may possess. I like to do this exercise as a bit of a history lesson, because this chart, just to talk to it, with the all the different boxes that you see here is a bit complex. So let me just walk you through this. Ultimately, we began our journey into the cloud with our public multi-tenant offering for the productivity suite well over a decade ago. In fact, I was one of the first architects to help deploy our very first customers into the public multi-tenant cloud, the predecessor to what we now know as Microsoft 365, was Business Productivity Online Suite and Live EDU program, etc. And those evolved into what we now know as today as the Microsoft 365, and ultimately here, what I'll refer to as our commercial side platform. We have the ability here with this to provide data residency. So if you look at Microsoft 365, and of course each of the services delivered under the Office 365 productivity suite, You can select which data location that you would have, for example, to say that a particular user in their mailbox and their OneDrive for Business, etc., would be resident within the continental United States or within Australia or UK, South Africa, etc. We have over 50 regions worldwide. And ultimately, it does support multi-geo capability so that you can have a single tenant that does span globally across multiple different regions. Now that is supported by a full global network as well as a global directory and a follow the sun support model, which did prohibit us, especially in the early days, with being able to get accreditation certifications with certain government requirements such as FedRAMP. So we built out a unique region going back about 9 years ago for the US government called our Government Community Cloud, or GCC. This is a region of commercial, but ultimately the data center locations for these regions are in the continental United States, and the backend services are managed by Screen US persons. Now, it did come along around the same time as when we introduced Azure, and ultimately we took many of the services that were part of the Microsoft 365 platform and pulled them out into their own unique product offerings, such as the Microsoft Online Directory Services, now part of Azure, and is called Azure Active Directory, and our RMS components now part of our Microsoft Information Protection product suite, for enterprise mobility and security, endpoint management for Intune, etc. So there is a shared fabric, if you will, of the enterprise mobility and security suite that spans both the Microsoft 365 commercial and GCC region. It also gave us a good platform for other services. Of course, the entire compute platform with infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and even other capabilities like the Dynamics 365 platform. By virtue of the fact that we did have a follow the sun support model and a global network, it precluded us from being able to meet some of the requirements, especially for the U.S. Department of Defense, Department of Energy, etc., that require true data sovereignty. So approximately 5 years ago, we constructed the Azure Government Enclave. It's fully isolated, both physically and virtually, in support of being able to have a network that is the only CONUS-based, continental United States, is managed by Screen US persons, and as well has directory services, etc., that are unique to the Azure government environment. This gives us the ability to have a contractual obligation for export controls, and it is purpose-built all up for protection of controlled unclassified information. Gave us a platform for us to build software as a service as well. So we built Office 365 for the DoD. This is our DISA security requirements guide for cloud computing, IL5 environment that ultimately is where we're able to construct Office 365 offering for protection of CUI and of course ITAR and export controlled data. Now the restriction there is that you have to be one of the DoD agencies that have eligibility or access to the DoD environment, which preclude even other federal cabinet level agencies and of course the defense industrial base. So we did a twin copy of the DoD environment that, as you know it today, is our Microsoft 365 government GCC high offering. It is oftentimes referred to as an IL4 equivalent environment. At the end of the day, it's managed the same exact control set as our IL5 environment for the DoD. So the control set has equivalency for both IL4 and IL5, as well as with FedRAMP High, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. So generally speaking, if you look at anything on the right side of this chart, that is what I refer to as a US sovereign cloud, that pairing between Azure Government and Microsoft 365 Government GCC High. Ultimately, the branding for GCC High is used for any of our software as a service versus Azure Government used for primarily IaaS and PaaS compute platform. There are components, for example, of Azure, like Azure Active Directory, they're branded GCC High. Many of our customers are, just interchangeably use GCC High and Azure Government. but they are paired together versus what we'll refer to on the left side of this chart is for our commercial side platform that does include the Microsoft 365 Government GCC Impact Level 2 environment. So if we look at this from a service offering differentiation, of course, this is a lot to peel apart here. I think I can just net it out. For those customers that are looking for CMMC level 1 in protection of federal contract information, or FCI, you can do that in any one of those, in any one of our clouds, right? As soon as you go to CMMC level 3, that's for protection of controlled and classified information, we do recommend the GCC High and Azure Government pairing with the US Sovereign Cloud because it has protections for all categories of controlled unclassified information to include export controlled data and what's referred to as QE specified. So there's other categories like nuclear data, et cetera, that also fall into that category, which are permissible within the GCC High environment. Now, there is an edge case where some of our customers would have, for example, a DFAR 7012 flow down and would not possess or have a reason or a future requirement to store or process ITAR or QE specified information, in which case our GCC environment may fit the bill. So you'll notice that there's a caveated yes here for CMMC level 3 and QE by virtue of the fact that it can cover those requirements for DFAR 7012 plus many of the categories of QE basic. But as soon as you get elevated into protection of especially ITAR data, that's when it's going to push you to GCC High. So with that, I'll move on, and I think David, you had a question here.
Yeah, it's more of a comment over a question because thanks to you and the Microsoft team, you've added another couple hours to my conversations now. Having to explain the difference between GCC and GCC High now that DFAR 7012 is supported under GCC has been an additional education requirement between myself and clients having to explain that area.
Yeah, it's a good point. If I had a quarter for every time that I get pulled into these conversations too, I think it'd be a wealthy man. Because you could look at the big differentiator between GCC and GCC High is ITAR, but then the better question is why. Oftentimes I get customers that come to me initially and they'll say, hey, I've got a FedRAMP moderate requirement. Can you meet FedRAMP moderate in our commercial or GCC cloud? Which we all know that the answer to that is yes, we in fact support FedRAMP high impact level across all of our clouds now. But then the question is why? Why do you need that? Oftentimes our customers conflate the requirement for FedRAMP with also a requirement for US citizenship, right? Or US persons or a CONUS-based solution. And the truth is if you look at GCC, it is a region of our commercial side environment. So it has a shared infrastructure with a global platform, right? So the network, if you look at, for example, the URLs into GCC, they're all .com, same URLs that you use to get in commercial side environment versus in order for us to enforce a CONUS-based network, et cetera, you'll see with GCC High, and with Azure Government, all the endpoints are .us, right? So they can only ever resolve to and have data processing and data storage and transmission within the continental United States. And so you get that full, true citizenship / data location assurance that we can be able to then contractually back with ITAR and other forms of QE specified. And the one thing I like to point out is if you do not work with ITAR, but you do have a DFAR 7012 requirement, then GCC is certainly a viable option. I would say look forward though into the future, because at the end of the day, if you ever have to store ITAR data and you need to migrate from GCC to GCC High, it's less than trivial. It's a very complex and expensive process. to migrate from one tenant to another.
Yeah, and that's generally what we kind of have the conversations around with clients is, you got to look at your business process. What's your future hold, and kind of understand the big picture.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And of course, if you need to straddle with commercial, the commercial side of your business, oftentimes, it's not a question of GCC versus GCC high. It ends up being, well, how do we find that line of demarcation, define our system boundary for the separation between commercial versus government? And if you're going to go into the government side platform, I think the default location oftentimes would be GCC high. One thing I always point out within our context of this discussion around CMMC and the Microsoft Cloud is that there's some that have an argument that by virtue of going to GCC high, et cetera, that you may become magically compliant with CMMC level 3. And the truth is, of course, a shared responsibility model. And how much of that responsibility that you would own as a customer will largely depend on which service that you're rolling out. I like this particular chart because it shows here, an illustration where, for software as a service, naturally you can delegate much of the responsibility to the cloud service provider. So that would be for Microsoft. So we manage, for example, application level controls and network controls on your behalf, and we of course can provide shared documentation that you can give to your C3PO assessor so that they can be able to establish what you inherit from the cloud platform. There's still always a customer scope of responsibility, especially as you look at data classification, endpoint protection, et cetera, is much more of a customer scope of responsibility. And of course, as you look more into infrastructure as a service with virtual machines, you'll own all the way down into the network control and host infrastructure as well. And this is all in context, of course, of a cloud native solution. As soon as you have a hybrid environment, then of course that changes the equation a bit for what your responsibilities are for the on-premises environment. But needless to say, what I always like to describe in terms of the shared scope of responsibility is we, Microsoft, enable compliance rather than providing compliance, right? We provide capabilities, and it's our customers that use those capabilities to implement and ultimately be able to demonstrate compliance with CMMC practices. Achieving a control or practice objective can be vastly more effective than satisfy a control requirement. Right, so instead of it being just check boxes, et cetera, you've heard Katie Arrington, Stacy Bojnak, et cetera, always talking about how this is a process. This is all about cybersecurity maturity. We're not looking just to go and move a bunch of knobs and dials and make you magically compliant, although we can help you to meet your control objectives through our platform, and I have a bit more to present on that as we go through it. If I look at this particular chart, it really shows what your organization responsibility would be more for software as a service, right? So Office 365, for example, productivity suite, being able to protect data, it's still your responsibility to protect and encrypt your data, your PII, et cetera. Now, if we go into the CMMC Acceleration Program, there's a few articles that I've authored that you have access to in the links here, and of course within our tech community, and it goes into depth on all the capabilities. I'll give you a high-level overview of it today. One of the things that we have been really focused on with the CMMC Acceleration Program is how our customers can demonstrate compliance with CMMC leveraging our cloud platform, right? And the first level of that is being able to establish what you get to inherit from us, and that's ultimately through a program of reciprocity with certifications that we've already have, in terms of looking at our cloud platform having course, FedRAMP authorizations. It has the DoD Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide, impact level, all the way up to level 5 in Azure Government and GCC High, right? So we're already able to help you to demonstrate compliance, leveraging these controls, across the spectrum of NIST 853 and the SRG, as well as, of course, your existing requirements with DFAR 7012. By all indications, the only requirement that you have from Microsoft in order to use our cloud platform is that you have the existing requirement for DFAR 7012, which dictates that for you to use a cloud platform, it must be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. Now, we do anticipate that as this goes and shifts towards CMMC level 4 and 5, that will actually be a better alignment with FedRAMP high as opposed to FedRAMP moderate. Good news is that we do have FedRAMP high equivalency across all of our cloud enclaves now. Another word about the CMMC acceleration program is that it's not specifically something you go purchase or buy. It's not a SKU. It's really a collection of resources and capabilities and even a partner community that we've assembled so that we can help you to achieve and of course demonstrate compliance and get certified on our platform. We've been focused primarily on CMMC level 3. As more details come out with the higher levels 4 and 5, we'll of course release that as well. With the North Star of us being able to help provide a cloud native environment that's pre-configured to maximize the capabilities of the Microsoft Cloud Platform for you to demonstrate that compliance with CMMC level 3. So that may translate to having, for example, a fully hosted landing zone that you can be able to lift and shift your entire enterprise into. That may be more for the small, medium-sized companies, or for building out shared enclaves, such as a meet-in-the-middle location for programs of record, or for mission systems, etc. And the way that we will achieve that North Star of having a fully pre-configured native environment, I really think of it as us building scaffolding. So Microsoft is only ever going to be able to get a customer somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 60% of the way to compliance, depending on which level that you require. It will take, because there's many process-oriented practices, etc. It will take additional things above and beyond just the configuration of the cloud platform. So I think it is being scaffolding, and many of our partners, like KTL Solutions, are building reference architectures that are layered in above our platform to be able to get you closer to that end goal. A part of the scaffolding that we have today is a set of capabilities, and I'll dive right into them. Of course, if you look at the program of reciprocity and what you can inherit, that's a set of documentation that we're building, such as control implementation statements, as well as a customer responsibility matrix, etc., that you'll be able to provide to your C3PAO assessor to answer many of the questions that they would have around establishing that inheritance that you get to enjoy by the use of our platform. We've also developed and have a version of this Microsoft product placemat, and I'll just break out here for a moment and share real time so you can see the product placemat live. What this is we began with an exercise to build out a crosswalk or a mapping between our various different certifications and cybersecurity frameworks. And it was a pretty confusing user interface to start off with, as you had mappings between NIST 853 and 171, of course, CMMC level 3, and really only made sense to compliance-oriented people. So to really have this resonate well, we reconstructed this into what looks like a periodic table. And it's ultimately listed from left to right in terms of each of the practice families for CMMC. It does go all the way up to a level 5, and we filled in everything up to a scope of level 3. And by default, what you'll see here on the screen is an illustration of which practices that you can demonstrate compliance with CMMC out of the box without any configuration. Naturally, many of the physical controls in a cloud-native platform or recovery controls, those are met by the cloud service provider, and you can see that they're lit up here as green. Now, we can also be able to come in and select various different services. By way of example, Azure Sentinel is our SIEM and SOAR solution, and it satisfies many of the requirements for a CMMC Level 3. So if you were to leverage that capability, I'll light it up and enable that service, you'll see that all the different practices that Sentinel contributes to is now either lit up as green for primary or yellow for secondary. Many, of course, is around the audit and accountability. Now I'll switch that off for just a moment so you can see that differentiation, and then I'll come down here. Many of the requirements for CMMC Level 3 are around endpoint management and controlling what has access to data. So if I can flip on the Intune and Microsoft Endpoint Manager service, you can see it just lights up the entire periodic table here from left to right. And as you can imagine, you know, a lot of the configuration management practices are satisfied by Intune. There's also others around access control that you can see here as well. And the reason for that are things like conditional access policies, where you can describe that only trusted devices are able to connect to your controlled unclassified information. In which case, Intune is our solution for endpoint management to define what a trusted device is, right? And then you can have a conditional access policy that says only allow a trusted device to connect to my CUI. Now, I've double clicked on that practice, and if I drill down into the bottom of the spreadsheet, into the product placemat, you'll see that we also have been filling in customer implementation guidance and practice implementation guidance. This is intended to be a single source of truth long-term for all the statements that we would have for implementation, so that as you go and, for example, roll out Intune and configure it for protection of CUI, that you can be able to incorporate in this practice implementation details into your system security plan. And ultimately, we'll be able to help you construct a system security plan and documentation that you can provide to your C3PAO assessor to help provide something of an easy button to get to compliance. All right, so that's the product placemat. It's available today. You can go download it. We have a version 2 coming here in the early summer time frame that will fill in a lot more of the practice information implementation details. The other point is I'll drill into here. We've got the Microsoft Compliance Manager. Now, this is a GRC tool that's available as part of the Microsoft 365 platform. It's available in commercial and government, including GCC and GCC High, and has the ability to overlay a set of what's referred to as assessment templates. So these assessment templates are in alignment with a set of actions that are recommended for you to implement within your M365 subscription that apply to whatever assessment template that you've implemented here. In this case, we do support CMMC levels 1 through 5. And we are proud to announce too that we've now got the assessment templates for CMMC level 1 through 5 available within our government clouds without having the requirement for a premium SKU. So it is available to you with the assessment templates with an E5 SKU. Would not have any additional costs beyond that. Now, how the Compliance Manager works is it gives you a set of actions to complete, and as you satisfy those actions, it will increase your compliance score. So in this particular case, you can see that it suggests an action here to meet the intent of each of the CMMC practice requirements, such as implementing account lockout policy. And if you implement it, you'll see that it gives you up to 27 points. Or another one is enable multi-factor authentication for non-admins, in which case it gives you 27 points to increase your score. This is not in alignment with the SPRS or SPURS score, although there's some discussions around how you can use the compliance manager during your assessment to be able to prove how you've been able to meet those objectives for the CMMC, especially once you get into CMMC levels 3 through 5. A similar capability that we have in Azure is through Azure Security Center, which is integrated into our Azure Defender product offering. So where Compliance Manager is primarily for the Microsoft 365 product suite across the security and compliance, as well as Office 365 productivity suite, Azure Security Center is for IaaS and PaaS. So it's more for the compute platform. We have what's referred to as Azure Blueprints. There is a CMMC Level 3 blueprint for Azure. In a similar vein as what I described for the Compliance Manager, it gives you a set of actions, what's called a policy initiative, for you to implement configurations such as enabling just-in-time access to your virtual machines or to network security groups on your Azure virtual networks. And as you implement those actions, of course, would increase what's referred to as a secure score. We have a new version of that we're working on now that will go a step further and to actually audit your environment to say that not only does it recommend a particular action, it can be able to report on whether or not you've completed that action through some infrastructure as code capabilities, even be able to enable or can pre-configure those. Those are working in parallel to an infrastructure as code project that we've released for Zero Trust architecture. It's called the Azure Security Benchmark Foundation. There's a Azure Security Benchmark blueprint that you can be able to access today. It's available within Azure Security Center as well. And the Azure Security Benchmark Foundation, it was ultimately built on a reference architecture that we had for FedRAMP moderate framework, so NIST 853. It does also have a lot of valid and of course meets many of the requirements for NIST 80171 and CMMC level 3 as well, by virtue of the fact that NIST 80171 is a subset ultimately of NIST 853. So very valuable. We're working on an update to the security benchmark blueprint to align with the documentation that we have within the product placemat, so that as you go and you roll out the ASBF blueprint as well as the CMMC blueprint, that you're able to then extract out, for example, the implementation and practice guidance for your system security plan. So it's not just a reference architecture for you to deploy, it's also a ability to provide you documentation that you can give for your assessment. I also have a set of blogs that have been in alignment with the history lesson I gave earlier. I recommend that you go and take a look. This understanding compliance between Microsoft 365 commercial, government, DoD offerings, kind of the golden standard discussion, especially helping you to decide between commercial, GCC, and GCC high. And then there's also this whole concept of what I refer to as the government GCC high conundrum for the DIB, is whether you deploy an enclave or go all in. And I've seen a lot of companies to struggle with deciding whether or not they're going to just go and move a couple of their users that work on defense contracts and leave everybody else in commercial, or whether or not it would make sense for them to go and lift and shift their entire company or organization into the government cloud. It really depends on the dynamics of your organization, if you're internal, international, etc. But I do give some pretty good context here in this blog that I do recommend that you go and take a look. Of course, if you ever have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me as well. And then back over to you, David.
All right, thanks, Richard. We appreciate all the information. So let me switch right over here. All right. So just kind of wrapping things up here, you know, as I mentioned early on, KTL, we have a variety of CMMC related services. Really, right from the beginning, we started at a higher level. We wanted to make sure that the account managers ourselves are registered practitioners and have a deep understanding of CMMC. So as many of you know that have spoken with me in the past, I probably provided more than an hour or 2 or 3 worth of free CMMC consulting along the way. But that's really where the initial consultation with the account manager begins, is to discuss your specific requirements, whether you're looking to go all cloud, hybrid, you know, kind of build out an enclave, or kind of a mix of Microsoft and other solution providers. And really, whether you've done a gap assessment and you want us to take a look at it and kind of pick through all the roadmap items and help start working to close those gaps, or you want us to actually do the gap assessment. Either way, we'll help you analyze the current state of your cybersecurity program and help to develop that roadmap. So, you know, once everything's said and done, we'll go through all the additional technical controls, the processes, the procedures, the documentations that are required, along with providing the assistance to start closing those gaps. And of course, as you know, we also provide licensing, and we also do the migration and the configuration services. So whether you have a managed services provider and you just need a place to go to get licensing and have them do the lifting and shifting for you, and have us there in the background just to do any, you know, as far as any additional CMMC consulting work, it's really up to you whether you want us to do it all or do a little. We're there for your assistance. And down the road, when you're ready to actually think you're ready for an assessment, we can do a complete audit review. So what we'll do is we'll go through all the practices in place, you know, and just double check and make sure that you're able to demonstrate the required components of the objective evidence for each of those, you know, as far as practices. Is it easily and readily available to provide your assessors? Are you able to just pass that information along, thus saving you a lot more time and effort during your audit process? And then as far as Azure configuration, we can do anything from tailoring out, you know, Azure Sentinel for you, making sure to configure whether it's for on-premise or out in the cloud, you know, as far as Azure government or a mix of both. Whether you need us to build out virtual machines and virtual infrastructure, whether you want to build out a data enclave, and you know, you have both commercial and government work, and you have people working on both, and you need that data enclave. Okay, well, we can build out a virtual data infrastructure, you know, as far as desktop infrastructure in Azure government, put everything up there, put the appropriate controls in place so nothing leaks out onto the systems as well. And then, of course, you know, everybody needs a CISO, but not everybody has the time, the resources, the staff, and of course, the budget to have a CISO in place. So maybe you need somebody there on a once a day, on a monthly basis, once a month, to come in and kind of double check your security program, or maybe you need a few days a month. Whether you need a little or a lot, our vCISO program is something that's going to be able to help provide that ongoing coaching so you remain compliant with your CMMC requirements. And lastly, we have our KTL 360 managed services for government contractors. So, you know, that's something that we're putting in place. We offer it in our commercial space. We are starting to offer it on our government clients. And, you know, we're making the additional changes in place. So, these are things that we're continuously working on to help provide the best-in-class services for our clients, whether new clients or for ongoing. We're always out there to keep you up to date with some of the requirements and the changes under CMMC and the DoD. So whether you're keeping on top of it or not, just know that we're keeping on top of it and keeping in touch with you. So we really wanted to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to join us for the webinar. I wanted to leave some time here at the end to kind of address any questions from the audience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth and kind of see what questions come up.
Hi, David and Richard. We've had quite a few. Oh, that's a cute picture. If we are already set up on GCC High, how long does it take to stand up and execute the CMMC acceleration program?
So the CMMC acceleration program is more a collection of resources, such as what I described with the compliance manager. So many of our customers would start by, after they have their GCC High tenant provision and whatnot, they may go in and apply that assessment template for CMMC, especially level 3 if you're in GCC High, and it'll give you a set of actions that you can complete, many of which are more, just enabling policies as recommended. Although there's a lot of work that would be in conjunction with that, such as defining what your data protection policies are and implementing those such as with data protection, Microsoft information protection, sensitivity labels, and that sort of thing. That's a lot more process oriented, so it's hard to say exactly how long it would take for your organization to implement those. If you already have a process in place today and you're just modeling that and how it's implemented with the technology, then it can be fairly quickly. I find for many organizations, stopping and thinking through what those data protection policies are, especially in protection of controlled and classified information, can be less than trivial, right?
Okay, thanks. Here's another one. Is there a schedule for feature parity for GCC High Dynamics with Enterprise?
If they're referring to, Dynamics Enterprise or, customer service, those licenses are available in GCC High. If they're looking at Dynamics 365, as far as Business Central, that's something that we could, you could potentially host up in Azure Government. So really need a little bit more context around that. The feature parity between commercial and government is rapidly shrinking, as far as some of the differences between the commercial side and the government side. Richard, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would generally agree that as services get rolled out, major services get rolled out, then you get into a regular rhythm of feature updates within those specific services. By way of example, once Intune rolled out within GCC High a couple of years ago, it stays at pretty close to parity with commercial. I can't speak intelligently though to D365. I work more on the Azure side of the house, so I could follow up though if looking at it, because I know there's so many different modules with D365. I'm not sure which all ones are available in GCC High at this time.
Okay, here's one more. How do I get eligibility for the GCC if I don't have a government contract?
That one used to be so hard to answer. In the past has been very difficult, but we did go to bat and we worked through this process with the government so that we were able to establish an eligibility process based on the existing SAM.gov registration. So fortunately now, as of about 6 months ago, you can simply provide your SAM.gov CAGE code, which is required for any federal contracts, and it does not have a prerequisite of an existing sponsor, right? So anyone can go and sign up for it as long as you meet those requisite requirements for for SAM.gov, you can transfer and ultimately prove eligibility for the government clouds using that CAGE code.
Great, thanks. Here's one that I think will be relative to everyone on the call. The caller says, we are working towards CMMC L3, but recently heard that NIST SP 800-172 got released as a supplement. Is that something we need to jump on, or should we still continue working towards CMMC L3?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's still a lot of details that'll come out. So NIST 800-172 is more in alignment with the CMMC level 4 and 5, right? And 4 and 5 still have there's of course already the practices that have been established, but how those requirements or what the assessment guide will be for those 4 and 5, especially in alignment with 172, are still baking.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. It's there, be aware of it, but it's, yeah, as you said, Richard, it's more for level 4 and level 5. Levels 1 through 3 are pretty well set based off of what Katie Arrington said. There is going to be some clarification around how long a policy has to be in place. The DoD did not mention as to when that guidance is going to be, as far as added into the assessment guides. But that is like one of the questions that are potentially going to provide some additional clarification to the levels 1 through 3.
And here's a related question. What license do we need to see the CMMC level 3 compliance from the Compliance Center?
If you're talking to about the compliance manager, that's on the E5 licenses.
Okay. I think we have time for one more. This one says, I heard it takes a long time to get a tenant set up and licenses provisioned. How long does it take?
If you asked me a year ago, I'd say it takes a while. Ask me today, literally within days. Once the licenses have been paid for and the order's been placed, tenant can be set up for provisioning within a matter of days. Then it's just really a matter of getting on the schedule, with the engineers to do the configuration.
Right.
Yeah, I would add, some color out there, because I've heard this comment come from multiple different locations that it takes too long to set up GCC high. I think some of that is the history of back when we had an SLA to set up the tenant. I think probably more of it today, at least the rumor mill out in LinkedIn and so forth, is really more in alignment of saying, how long does it actually, once you it's not just the process of going through the paperwork and the license procurement and getting the tenant stood up, as you mentioned, that can be days now. It's then, what you need to do afterwards before you can turn the lights on, getting your tenant ready for being able to begin migrating into it or to use those services. There's a variable amount of time there for configuring it to meet CMMC level 3 requirements that could take longer. So need to make sure that there's a understanding between what your project management schedule would be for not only lighting up the tenant, but how long is it going to take for you to actually set it up and migrate into it, right?
Yep. Sounds good. And I'm going to try to squeeze in one more here before the top of the hour. What are the pros and cons for a company that only once in a while works on ITAR restricted contracts? What are the pros and cons of setting up a GCC tenant for all other work and the company directory, and a GCC high tenant for just the ITAR restricted ones?
That's really, they in essence be creating a data enclave where the ITAR data would reside. And then you'd really have to build out the access controls and make sure that the information doesn't bleed out into other parts of the network. So you're going to really have to define what the system boundary is around your GCC high, I mean, your GCC high environment where that ITAR data resides.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, Richard, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or?
Yeah, how long's a piece of string? You know, the thing is, the thing is that I find a lot of customers looking at the motivation for doing a cross-sovereign cloud solution like that is to save money, because the cost of the SKUs for, you know, GCC or commercial are less than that of GCC high. I've also seen customers where it's ended up costing them more money because they're double paying for licenses, because you got a bunch of users that are swivel seating. You're having to pay for additional equipment if you're going to have them with isolated panes of glass or use WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop environment to access the GCC high. So it really will depend on your business, whether you can effectively do so. I have seen many companies that have effectively swivel seat, and some that don't have any other option than to swivel seat, especially if they're working within conflicting or you know, in many cases you'll have multiple jurisdictions that just directly compete with each other, like export controls in the U.S. compared to Canadian control goods in Canada. They have to swivel seat, right? There's no other option. But you know, for those that are just looking at the least complexity, we always recommend going into a single tenant unless you can avoid it.
Okay, sounds good. I have been asked by a few folks to share a link to the placemat, and I will when I email you all. Thanks for attending. I'll be sure and include a link to that tool in that. I think that's about all we have time for today. Any parting words, Richard and David?
Yeah, I mean, just keep moving forward. Don't get the deer in the headlights mentality of things. You know, if you need to take small little bite-sized, you know, chomps out of things, then do it one piece at a time. You know, eventually you'll get to the whole big picture. It is a journey and does take time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, for me, I would encourage the audience to come and join us with the CMMC Acceleration Program. We'll follow up here with not only the link to the product placemat, but there's also a short survey that we ask folks to fill out, and you can get on our mailing list for future updates to our CMMC solutions.
Oh, and one last thing, you know, there is the, as far as Azure Government Marketplace, we will be having our information up there as well.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, and thanks everyone for attending. That concludes our webinar today. Thanks.
Thank you.